Hello and welcome to another episode of ORF US Dispatch. In this episode, we discuss Tara Reade's allegations against Joe Biden, Trump's latest conspiracy theory, Obamagate, and why is Trump taking a premature victory lap over the US's fight against coronavirus. Finally, we end with a round of predictions on some Republican Senate seats that the Democrats can flip to potentially gain control of the US Senate. So let's get started. Dhruva, Joe Biden's aide from his time in the US Senate, Tara Reade, has alleged that he sexually assaulted her in 1993. Biden has, of course, denied it, but has said that Americans should vote their heart on this issue. As this plays out in the courts over whether this is true or not, what do you think What do you think is going to be the political fallout of this? Do you think this will impact the Biden campaign's effort to sort of elevate their candidate as a moral contrast to Trump?
Well, this has been a major allegation against Biden and it's an old allegation from the 1990s. I think a number of things to keep in mind. One is that so far it doesn't look like it has stuck. There are many people who have called into question at least elements of the narrative here. At the same time, of course, Democrats have been pressing President Trump on his own record, and they did so in 2016 with women and sexual harassment and very serious allegations against Trump on that score. I think part of what we're seeing is this sort of attempt by Republicans to take the wind out of the sails on that issue. I think apart from it's hard to say where this will lead forward. But I think a few things to keep in mind. One is that Biden himself is known for being very hands-on, if you will. I mean, with men, with women, he's a sort of hugger. He's a very sort of contact-oriented person, and this is something that's been commented on for some time, and it's just part of his his inclination of politics. And a lot of people, in this day and age, think that a lot of that is inappropriate. So, there has been this thing that has dogged him over the course of the campaign. The second is, given the very serious nature of the allegations against Trump, it's very hard to see how this can, this seems relatively mild by comparison. So again, that calls into question how much this will have an effect. And then finally, I think Biden himself has tried to negate this by saying, I don't believe her. If I did believe her, I wouldn't vote for me. So he's tried to sort of reverse that in some ways by calling into question her narrative, but also saying that if those allegations were serious, that he admits that those would be quite damaging to him. So again, we'll have to see how much of this sticks, how much this helps or hurts him, particularly with women voters. But again, there are several reasons, as I mentioned, that to counter question how much of an effect this will have on the election.
Right, I agree. Regardless of sort of how this plays out and how this impacts Biden's prospects in the election, I also think this is sort of going to have a long-term impact in case of the right's allegation that the left is often expedient on such things when it happens to one of them. So in any ways, moving on to more trouble for Biden, Obamagate. In a series of over 100 tweets this month, Trump alleged a deep-rooted conspiracy against his presidency, even long before his presidency even began. For our viewers, bear with me, this is a bit twisted. So the conspiracy theory revolves around Trump campaign advisor and eventually his national security advisor, Michael Flynn. In 2017, Flynn had pled guilty to lying to the FBI about his interactions with Russian diplomat Sergei Kislyak during the presidential transition. In the final days of the Obama administration, it just so happened that the conversations between Kislyak and Flynn were sort of recorded as part of routine US surveillance on Russian officials. Generally, in such cases, the identity of US officials is redacted, but are open to unmasking requests by US officials. That's a normal practice in American security policy, where US officials can request the unmasking of such individuals to better understand the gathered intelligence at hand. But under the alleged conspiracy, what is the beef about? The beef is that Obama officials allegedly unmasked Flynn in order to sort of set him up for prosecution for lying about discussing US sanctions with Kislyak. And even though there are now reports that this entire conspiracy may get debunked, it is expected that Trump will just double down, since Biden has sort of confirmed that he attended a meeting with Obama and senior officials like Susan Rice, then National Security Advisor. And in this meeting, the Flynn issue was indeed covered. So, Dhruva, why do you think Trump is sort of dragging Biden into this? What is the play here?
Well, much like the Hunter Biden issue, which is the allegations against Biden's son for his business dealings in Ukraine, which is something that Trump tried to, during his impeachment trial last year, was something that he repeatedly tried to draw attention to. This seems to be an attempt to put Biden on the back foot and sort of make him seem as if he's at fault. He even spoke about the possibility of criminal charges, something that the Attorney General Barr said sort of he would not pursue. But it's one of those things that it seems to be just an attempt of Trump trying to push Biden into a corner and create this idea that he was guilty of this wrongdoing.
Absolutely. And like I said, now there's a recent Washington Post article which says Flynn's name wasn't masked in the first place. So there is no there to speak. But it's possible that it's possible that Trump is sort of going after Biden on this because over the course of this race, Biden has sort of led Trump by at least 50 points when it comes to public perceptions of how honest or trustworthy they seem. So maybe that is something that he's trying to offset with this issue. But speaking of Trump, he has now sort of engaged in a premature victory lap on the US's fight against coronavirus. Even though the US has had the highest number of infections, over 1.5 million, and over 95,000 people have died. Trump has said that this is some sort of a quote-unquote badge of honor because it's indicative of the level of testing the US has done. Do you see some rationale here, or is this just another case of Trump being, Trump?
Well, in some ways, this is to be expected. Trump was certain to come under considerable criticism for the handling of the coronavirus, where the US has not just the largest number of cases, largest number of deaths on a really quite a remarkable scale. And also, because of the very patchwork efforts at trying to combat coronavirus on a state-by-state and sometimes on a county-by-county or city-by-city level, we've seen a very uneven response, which is likely to lead to the coronavirus pandemic lasting even longer over the coming months in the US relative to places in East Asia, for example, which took much more quick and drastic action. So, in an effort again to deflect from some of the failings of the administration, at least, and there are many reasons for those failings. Some of it is also in the legal and the federal structure of the U.S. But for whatever reason, instead of being blamed for it, you're seeing Trump now trying to turn it around and show how successfully he has dealt with it. The testing is one example. Ventilators is something else. He called the U.S. the king of ventilators and has proudly been saying how he is providing ventilators to several other countries, including India, of course, which he tweeted about. So I think it is, again, another example of positioning in the run-up to the November election.
Right. I think the nuance on this is important because otherwise it seems as if the whole idea of American exceptionalism is upside down with Trump, But, moving on. 2020 elections are also important from the standpoint of the Senate being at stake. In the 2018 midterms, for instance, Democrats won 41 seats to flip the House, which is the lower house of the U.S. Congress, with their largest ever win margins. Now they seem to be in striking distance to take the Senate as well. So for example, like about 20 Republicans are sort of seeking re-election as compared to 12 Democrats, and out of which only one Democratic seat is such that they are defending it in heavy Trump country, i.e. Alabama. In your view, what is the significance of Democrats flipping the Senate?
So the Democrats have had control of the House now for some time. The House of Representatives, the lower chamber of the U.S. Congress, that has often frustrated Trump's program. But equally, they have often been frustrated or had to make compromises because the Senate has been in the hands of Republicans now for some time. And that has led to the Senate, including the late years, Obama years, actually blocking a lot of legislation that the U.S. that the Obama White House wanted. But equally, you've seen an alliance, particularly by the Senate leadership and the White House currently, in pushing forward a more conservative agenda. And this is, of course, amongst other things, helped Trump on impeachment, on Supreme Court nominations, and such. I mentioned Supreme Court nominations because that's one thing that is very important, very hard fought at this point of time. The Democrats are worried about the Supreme Court, which has 9 justices and requires confirmation by the Senate, that has become too conservative, might reverse a lot of progressive judicial rulings over the last 50 years, including on things like abortion and voting rights and such. And so that will be one area, if the Democrats control the Senate, where they will actually have a more significant say in terms of blocking judicial appointees by a conservative president should Trump get reelected. So I think this is the real significance of the Senate election. It will be in some ways almost as hard fought as the presidential election.
All right, like we always do, let's end with a couple of predictions. Let's talk about what are some of those Republican seats that the Democrats can sort of pick up in 2020. Let me start with one. I think Arizona is a place where the Democrats can make considerable gains. Martha McSally, of course, had lost her bid when she ran against Kirsten Sinema for Jeff Flake's seat, but now she holds John McCain's seat, and now she's up for election against former astronaut Mark Kelly, and he's been doing really well in terms of his fundraising and so on. So I think that's one seat that the Democrats can pick. What about you?
Well, 2 others to think about. One is South Carolina, where Lindsey Graham, who's a long-term Republican senator, he is known as a sort of foreign policy hawk. He's a military veteran, particularly interested actually in the Middle East and South Asia. But he faced a tougher than expected primary. He'd run for president in 2016, hadn't done very well. Initially seemed to have a very difficult relationship with Trump, but soon became a very close ally. I think it appears to be he was worried about Trump supporting another Republican candidate against him in a primary race. Lindsey Graham has pulled through, but will now face a Democratic challenger. I mean, I suspect if one had to make a prediction that he would pull through, he is reasonably popular, and he's reasonably popular, and Trump will campaign for him. And South Carolina is quite a red state, so it will be tough for the Democrats to flip it. But the fact that it's even now in play is quite significant. A second one I would address is Colorado, where the Cory Gardner, who's sort of moderate, seems moderate Republican in a very increasingly Democrat blue state, Colorado. Who was often considered one of the people who might break with Republicans on certain key issues, including the potential presidential impeachment. But he now faces a challenge from John Hickenlooper, who also ran for president this time around, didn't have a very good campaign, but remains, it seems, a very popular former governor of Colorado. He was the mayor of Denver. He is also quite a centrist. He's a businessman by background. He had a very successful brewing company and restaurants in Denver. Then he moved into politics. So that seems to be what is likely to be a very hard fought, very close, and it is one where it looks the Democrats look like they could flip this.
Right. And since the last time we spoke, I think 2 other Republican senators have found themselves in hot water. Richard Burr from North Carolina and Kelly Loeffler from Georgia. Although Richard Burr is not up for re-election come November, I think he's up for re-election again in 2022, but there are speculations that he may resign. Now, what is the issue with these 2 senators? They have been accused of insider trading. They have been accused of selling stocks after attending a classified briefing on the economic impacts of the coronavirus pandemic. So there is an investigation by the SEC of all entities into them. So Richard Burr is one, and if he resigns, there might be an election. The other, of course, is Georgia, Republican stronghold, Kelly Loeffler. She's going to be up for re-election in November. And that's also a race reportedly which is being closely monitored by the Trump White House, because in 2016 Georgia, Trump picked Georgia only by 5 percentage points. So Georgia is going to be key in 2020, and how Kelly Loeffler does in Georgia is also going to matter a lot, even beyond the idea of if the Democrats can take the Senate or not. What do you think? Do you think this scandal will also play heavily in the Senate races?
It could feature quite prominently. Richard Burr has already had to resign as the head chair of the Intelligence Committee. He stepped down temporarily from that position. Marco Rubio has filled that role. But I think as the investigation proceeds, he's not up for re-election, as you mentioned. But Georgia, Georgia is also becoming an increasingly blue state, and the last governor and Senate races there were surprisingly close, although Republicans pulled through. We're seeing now a few states which have been traditionally Republican strongholds, Arizona, Georgia, for example, now slowly coming into play. Partly because these are places that have attracted, in Atlanta and Phoenix and stuff, have attracted white collar workers, have attracted a lot of immigrants, and so that changing demographic is also changing the political balance in these places as well.
All right. On that note, I hope everyone enjoyed our second episode of ORF US Dispatch. Until next time, goodbye and stay safe.